One thing we've learned from our discussion on hungering and thirsting for righteousness is that we must actively pursue holiness if we want one day to enter the kingdom of heaven. But sometimes life calls for another strategy to be put into place. Sometimes we have to defend holiness when evil comes to destroy it. The Thomas More Society in Chicago, Illinois, has spent several decades fighting for righteousness through our country's legal system. Such battles may not seem as romantic as the stories of saints standing up to corrupt kings and dictators in the face of injustice, but rest assured, it is very much the same thing when an honest lawyer in the 21st century turns down a high-paying law firm to devote his life to protecting the weak and defending the rights of Christ's church. Taking their name from the saint who stood up to the powerful monarchy that was polluting Christianity with heresy in the 16th century, these good people, no doubt, make the great English saint proud. Year after year, they answer the call to defend righteousness from the perils of a culture bombarded by evil.
Religion is not something that you keep within the four walls of a church. It may be unlikely a place of evangelization, but in fact that's something you can accomplish in a courtroom very, very effectively. One powerful reason we took the name Thomas More was his famous statement that he was the king's good servant, but God's first. And I think that epitomizes what we do.
St. Thomas More is a model for what the Thomas More Society does, because he was a great man of faith, and our work is driven by our faith, and he was willing to resist the government to avoid violating his religious beliefs. And we have to do that here from time to time.
When you're looking at St. Thomas More, I mean, we kind of joke sometimes, our job is not to lose our heads. You have to keep that happy warrior type mentality, the sorts of things that St. Thomas, that he stood for. He was a very competent attorney, but he was also a very faithful person. And so we try to bring that to what we do on a day-to-day basis.
Well, we started out as a one-case law firm. Of course, it was one of the biggest cases ever to come down the pike, involving an alleged nationwide racketeering enterprise, that is the Scheidler defense, back in 1986. And I described the ensuing years as a pilgrimage through the valley of the shadow of death. The Scheidlers had no money to pay us. My partners were getting increasingly impatient with this case that would never end. So my managing partner said, "Tom, I think maybe the time has come you should either quit the firm or quit the case." And we couldn't quit the case. The Scheidlers had no other lawyer. So I resigned. I went home. My wife said, "Go back and unresign tomorrow morning." And when I did, they said it was unanimous. The resignation stuck. So we were out on the street, and we had to start up a nonprofit. And that was the beginning of the Thomas More Society. That very day when we moved my books, my papers from my law firm, I remember sitting in this donated office in a derelict office building, looking out the window, and I thought, what in the heck have I done? We were busier than bees. We were engulfed in what we call trial by avalanche. That is the final preparation for a jury trial of this magnitude. A national conspiracy was alleged. 30 or 40 depositions had been taken around the country. We had papers strewn all over the floor, over the hallways. We had briefs galore. It was a very hectic, intensive time, legally and personally. Well, Now versus Scheidler started out as a one-count antitrust claim. This was a terrible misunderstanding of the antitrust laws, which are aimed at protecting competition within a lawful market for goods or services. And of course, this is a market for killing infants. When we got to trial, the case went on for months. We brought in Norma McCorvey, Jane Roe of Roe v. Wade. We had a terrific bunch of witnesses. People were intrigued. As the case went on, I think we gained a lot of respect. I remember I was out in New York and I picked up the Church Bulletin. My gosh, there was a story that quoted me about this racketeering case in Chicago. So the Catholic press came through tremendously. The mainstream press came through, and I think the message got across that activism was a good thing. It wasn't extortionate, it wasn't violent. It was a prayerful, legitimate thing to do, because our movement is a civil rights movement, the civil rights of unborn human beings. When we were down at a legal meeting in Atlanta, I got my gumption up and I dialed up the SCLC, and they answered the phone and they said, "We know about your case. Come on over. We're having a party. Come and join us." They agreed with us 100% that this abuse of the racketeering law was awful. If the racketeering law had been enacted when Dr. King was conducting his sit-ins through the South, the racketeering law could have been used against him, because sitting at a lunch counter is very much similar to blocking access to an abortion provider. We won 8-1, and ultimately we prevailed. It took us 6-7 years. It should have taken, I think, a couple of conversations. Big as that case was, though, it put us in contact with people all over the country who then started asking us to help them with their individual legal problems. And little by little, we found ourselves handling cases in not just Chicago, but nearby Midwestern states, Florida, California. Since then, we've been in all 50 states. We represent nationwide organizations. We've been successful in attracting a lot of very, very talented lawyers, many of whom worked in large corporate law firms, who have come to work for us. They're paid substantially less in terms of their financial remuneration, but the rewards are great, not only spiritual rewards, but the professional excitement of battling these cases, which involve very, very significant, challenging legal issues, and taking them all the way up from police courts all the way up to the highest courts in the country, the Supreme Courts of the various states and the U.S. Supreme Court.
The Thomas More Society is a bunch of great lawyers who will take big cases all the way to the Supreme Court. And I'm very proud of the fact that Tom Brecka always has been willing to take what I call the little Charlie Brown Christmas tree clients.
The Sisters of St. Charles in the western suburbs of Chicago came onto our radar screen a few years ago, and Tom saw this controversy where a strip club had been opened next to them. And so he reached out to them and said, "Hey, we're sure you have a lawyer. We'd love to help out if you need it." And it turned out the sisters didn't have a lawyer at all. This case involved a very, what's historically known as a corrupt town, back to Al Capone days. That has a lot of strip clubs, and they put the strip club, allowed it to go immediately next to the convent, and not just the convent, but where the senior sisters, the retired sisters, live. And when I went and visited that site, I walked out of the retired sisters' chapel, and immediately out the back there were glass doors. You could see the strip club from where these wonderful holy ladies were praying fervently.
So we got into it. We raised zoning objections. We filed a big lawsuit. We sent investigators in there. We fought over 3 years. We lost on some zoning issues, but we were ready to appeal. But then we won on the liquor license, and it turned out they hadn't been paying their taxes, and they were paying lawyers to fight us.
Here in Illinois, You had the governor of Illinois and the attorney general combining to force Catholic charities out of foster care. They had invented foster care in this state in the early 1900s. And so we were privileged to be able to represent them to say, look, if you are trying to provide the largest number of good foster parents for the kids of the state, let each religious tradition go and choose the parents who believe in the tenets of the religious tradition. And so that was really the right we were trying to vindicate. We called it religious discrimination, and thousands of children were displaced out of the Catholic charities because of a couple of politicians that were following an agenda that was not the agenda of the majority of the people of the state of Illinois. But those sorts of cases where we push back cause national impact and help to frame some of the response then in the Hobby Lobby case and some of these other challenges to religious liberty. So even though there was a temporary loss there, it was a longer-term victory for the whole country, where we were able to mount a strong defense of religious liberty as a church. For those of us who work at Thomas More Society, it informs everything we do. Without faith, why would you take a large pay cut to come work in the nonprofit field if there weren't something more about what you were doing? And so that faith really sustains you, and it gives that commitment that you say, look, I'm here to do the most good that I can in whatever time I've been given.
Well, the work we do here, I think, addresses ultimate values: the sanctity of life, the sense of the sacred, that we are endowed by our Creator with inalienable rights. Inalienable meaning rights that you cannot trade or take away. So I think that it's a joy as well as a necessity that we Christian and Catholic lawyers especially use our legal talents, our professionalism, to the extent we're able in that effort.
We're in a growth industry, and the challenges to religious liberties are only going to go greater as our country becomes more diverse. And so the calls increase, the phone never stops ringing, and the Thomas More Society is going to be there for religious believers and pro-lifers wherever they need us.
Yes, I think if I were a business lawyer by now, I'd be long retired. The kind of work we do with the rewards here that resonate, as I said, with our fundamental values as believers, as Christians, Catholics, I think that extends your career, and I hope I can continue to do this work for another 10 years. It's very rewarding, very meaningful, very important.